we would like to welcome Matt McQuade to Coffee with Kyla. Matt, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Matt, you've spent a lot of time in economic development for the state of Ohio, and you've also spent the last 12 years with WOM Columbus, and have been focused and proactive in business attraction to our city. And we just want to know your point of view on several topics here today, specifically around Columbus and its potential and why you love Columbus, LOTH loves Columbus. But really, could you tap into why are organizations drawn to our city? Why are they looking to Columbus right now?
I mean, it's a pretty large answer that has a lot of different elements to it. I mean, first of all, had this community not come together and prioritized economic development on a regional level 12 years ago when Columbus 2020 was formed, I would strongly argue that we would not be seeing this momentum that we're seeing. Wow. Having a well-capitalized organization with professionals that have been around most of the time, me and several of my colleagues have been with the organization for over a decade, is really meaningful to actually building the momentum that we're seeing today. So a lot of credit goes to the community for making this a priority in the first place. Right. As far as the location factors, they kind of vary by industry, but at a high level, demographic Columbus is really strong. Everybody talks about the baby boomer generation retiring and that being the largest segment of the workforce. And that's a big reason we're having the challenges that we are in the labor market. But Columbus has a bit of an advantage because it skews younger. We do have one of the highest concentrations of millennials in the country. And I think are the only metro in the Eastern US that even ranks in the top 10, which is saying something. So talent's a big driver. Accessibility is another one. And this also can kind of span industries, whether you're talking about manufacturing, distribution, or office. You can reach a very high segment of the US population very easily from the Columbus market, which means a lot. And then finally, it's cost. And that's something I think we may start grappling with a little bit more because we are going into what I expect to be an era of higher growth in this market. And that will put costing pressures on the market. But as of today, when you compare Columbus to many of our peer markets that we compete against, it is less expensive to operate here. So talent, accessibility, cost, those are the three top factors.
Awesome. That's great. And I mean, the people in the Midwest, you can't beat them, right?
Exactly. I strongly believe that. I've traveled all over this country and I'm always happy to land back in Columbus.
Yeah. We were talking about Ohio State earlier. Anytime we have any sort of Ohio gear on outside of Ohio, we get stopped. Like, where are you from in Ohio? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's international too.
Right. Totally. I agree. So here's some Ohio history. You talked a little about the state overall. So Cleveland and Cincinnati, we have the three C's, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus. There was really a lot of economic growth for Cleveland and Cincinnati during that Industrial Revolution and building those cities up. And Columbus was a little bit smaller. And I think maybe you can help me with the stat. It's just in the last couple of years grown to be closer in density to those two cities.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. The city itself, like when you just look at the municipality, Columbus, the population's greater than Cincinnati and Cleveland combined. And the metro area by the 2030 census, we would expect to be the largest metro in the state.
So we talk about Industrial Revolution being a big factor in those two cities' growth. Is this the tech revolution in Columbus? What are we seeing here?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, starting with places like Cleveland and Cincinnati, they did peak at a different time period than Columbus did. We may be peaking right now, or maybe not even yet. I mean, our future is probably whatever we want it to be right now as a metro area. But places like Cleveland and Cincinnati were peaking in probably the 60s, and then and that's largely because they're on navigable waterways. Cleveland being on Lake Erie, Cincinnati being a river town on the Ohio River. Columbus isn't on a navigable waterway, so we didn't see the amount of industrial investment that those markets did pre 1970. And then the world started globalizing at a rapid pace, and manufacturers started chasing cheaper labor in foreign markets that they could then just export those goods into the US market. And economically, it made a ton of sense. And because of that, because of when they were peaking, times became relatively hard in segments of their economies in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Columbus didn't have to deal with that kind of baggage. And as a result, because of all those factors I mentioned earlier, talent, accessibility, low cost, we find ourselves very competitive in 2022.
Yeah.
Now, where places like Cleveland and Cincinnati and other markets in the Midwest or the Great Lakes region felt some pain in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s because of globalization, I really see that trend turning back in favor of markets like Cleveland and Cincinnati because companies are investing more in the US again. And places like Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, I feel, will be a focal point for high value add manufacturing going into the future. On top of that, we've got water, and climate change is a real thing. I think we can all agree on that now as a country, but maybe there's a segment of the population that'll still fight me on it. But not having the same climate risk as other markets in the US, think Gulf Coast, think of the Southwest that is dependent on the Colorado River Basin for their water. This is a resilient place, and I think it's all coming back in the next 50 years for the state of Ohio and this part of the country. It's going to be ours. You know, it's ours to win.
That's amazing. And I think let's talk about why Intel specifically chose Ohio, and it was a few of those reasons: the seismic safety of the area. We don't, wildfires are more rare. Things that our nature offers and the stability of it, the state of Ohio, what you just referenced.
Yeah, and it expands upon those three things that I mentioned. And it's what Intel's looking at doing here is building the industry in an area that doesn't really have it at all compared to other parts of the country or world. I mean, think about semiconductors in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, the Phoenix area, the Portland area, Texas. We don't have that right now. But what they saw was talent-wise, we have a tremendous amount of manufacturing and engineering talent in the state of Ohio to begin with. But then if you expand that out, a 3 or 4 hour radius, you have engineering colleges like Purdue, you have Carnegie Mellon. You look at the state up north, and we can bring talent in from there as well. And that's another reason I'm so bullish on this state, because whereas in the past, if you wanted to work in the tech industry, you went to the West Coast. Now, if you're anywhere in the Midwest, you don't have to do that. You can just come to Ohio and actually be able to afford a house in your 20s.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So you have experience clearly in the city specifically, but the state of Ohio. What growth have you seen in your tenure, and where do you think we might be headed?
So I started my career at the Ohio Department of Development. I was there for about 18 months, and then I worked for an organization called the Ohio Business Development Coalition that was responsible just for managing the state's brand. And that organization isn't around anymore, but I really view it as a precursor to Jobs Ohio, because it became evident what the state could accomplish if it privatized a certain element of economic development. And I feel that part and parcel with our journey in the Columbus region, a lot of it may not have been possible if Jobs Ohio hadn't been created right after we were created. So you took the experience of the Ohio Business Development Coalition, and then you capitalized it exponentially and expanded its scope and made the state have an ability that it hadn't had before to work at the speed of business and retain talent for the long term, and very quickly create and implement new programs because they had the flexibility to do so, being a private organization. So I feel like the state's evolution in economic development is only going to enhance our ability in the next couple of decades to win this next generation of investment that's coming into the U.S.
That's incredible. What an exciting time for our little city.
Yeah.
It's
the place to be.
It's the place to be. And I always think of Columbus as a little bit of an underdog in the grand scheme of things, but man, what a lot of potential.
I think the underdog days are over. Our CEO, Kenny McDonald, always says, like, if the question with the Columbus 2020 strategy was, can we be a growth market? We've answered that. We are now a growth market. And now the question is, what do we want this to look like? Within these walls, it's we want to be the most prosperous market in the country. We don't just want to grow. We want that growth to be shared across the community and everybody can participate in it. And that's going to be a big challenge because that vision was created before we won Intel. And now we know that we are a tech market globally, bar none, once the semiconductor industry is built here in the next couple of years. And there's never been a situation like we're in now where inequality hasn't increased. So we have our work cut out for us, but luckily we have been taking that message into the community for 2 years now that shared prosperity is the way to go. So we also have a jump start on trying to be the first place in this country that's grown at a high rate, but also closed economic gaps.
I love that. It's a wonderful time, and sounds like we have the right people in the right spots trying to do the right thing. And I'm just excited to see where all of this goes.
Got a great economic development community here in the region and the state. And I really think that the economic future has a lot going for us, and it's in really good hands.
Cool. Well, I'm so glad I moved here.
Me too. Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you, Matt, so much for your time and your insight. We've enjoyed having you as a guest on Coffee with Kyla, and we will talk to you soon.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.